Saturday, January 24th, 2026, 9:05 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Whittier neighborhood. Alex Pretti, a 37-year-old ICU nurse who spent his days saving lives at a VA hospital, holds up his phone to record federal agents. He's directing traffic, helping people navigate the chaos of an immigration enforcement operation. 28 seconds later, he's lying on the ground, shot multiple times by Border Patrol agents. At least 10 bullets fired in 5 seconds. He dies at the scene. Alex Pretti was a United States citizen. He had no criminal record. He was a lawful gun owner with a permit to carry. He was, by all accounts, trying to help people caught in the crossfire of Trump's immigration crackdown. And the Trump administration's first response? They called him a domestic terrorist who tried to massacre law enforcement and assassinate federal agents. But then the videos came out, dozens of them, from bystanders, from witnesses, from multiple angles, and they told a completely different story. This is the crisis that forced Trump to reshuffle his entire Minneapolis operation. This is the moment when even Republicans started demanding answers. And this is the story of how a policy meant to enforce immigration law turned an American city into a war zone. Alex Pretti's death wasn't an isolated incident. It was the second fatal shooting of a U.S. citizen by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis in less than 3 weeks. On January 7th, Renee Nicole Good, also 37 years old, and also a U.S. citizen, was shot in the head by an ICE agent during immigration enforcement operations. An autopsy commissioned by her family confirmed she died from a gunshot wound to the head. 2 American citizens. 2 fatal shootings by federal agents. 3 weeks. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara put it bluntly in a Sunday morning interview. This is the 3rd shooting now in less than 3 weeks by federal agents. Earlier in the weekend, we noted that there had only been 3 homicides in Minneapolis in 2026 so far, and 2 of those were carried out by federal immigration enforcement agents. Think about that statistic for a moment. In a major American city, 2/3 of the homicides in the first month of 2026 were committed by federal agents conducting immigration operations. O'Hara went even further. The Minneapolis Police Department went the entire year last year recovering about 900 guns from the street, arresting hundreds and hundreds of violent offenders, and we didn't shoot anyone. A local police department that recovered 900 guns and arrested hundreds of violent criminals didn't kill a single person. Meanwhile, federal agents conducting immigration enforcement killed 2 U.S. citizens in 3 weeks. People have had enough, O'Hara said, and that's an understatement. The operation that brought federal agents to Minneapolis is called Operation Metro Surge. It started as an effort to root out fraud in Minnesota's Somali community related to a pandemic-era program scandal. The investigation actually began in 2022 under President Joe Biden's administration, and dozens of fraud-related charges have been filed. But after conservative online influencers elevated the year-old scandal, Trump focused massive resources on Minnesota. More than 3,000 federal agents were deployed to Minneapolis. To put that in perspective, they outnumber Minneapolis's police force nearly 5 to 1, 1,000 federal agents in one city for immigration enforcement, and now 2 American citizens are dead. Here's where the government's narrative completely falls apart. Within hours of Alex Pretti's death, Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and White House advisor Stephen Miller all rushed to characterize Pretti as a violent threat. Bovino said Pretti was brandishing a firearm. Noem claimed he was trying to impede a law enforcement operation and suggested he showed up specifically to attack agents. Stephen Miller went furthest, posting on social media that Pretti was a domestic terrorist who tried to assassinate federal law enforcement. Even President Trump posted that Pretti was a gunman with a weapon loaded with 2 additional full magazines and ready to go. There was just one problem. The videos, multiple bystander videos, verified by Reuters, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, and virtually every major news organization, tell a dramatically different story. The videos show Pretti recording agents with his phone, not a weapon, in his right hand. His left hand was empty. 28 seconds before the first shot, An agent pushed a civilian wearing an orange backpack. Pretti moved toward the sidewalk, trying to help two other people being pushed by agents. When Pretti stood between an agent and a woman the agent was pushing to the ground, he put his arm around the woman to help her. He was then pepper sprayed by the agent. Multiple angles show Pretti being wrestled to the ground by several federal agents. Around 6 agents surrounded him. And here's the crucial detail that destroys the government's narrative. The videos appear to show an agent in a gray jacket reaching into the scuffle empty-handed, emerging with a gun in his right hand, then turning away from Pretti and moving away roughly 1 second before the first shot was fired. In other words, an agent appears to have removed a gun from the pile of agents on top of Pretti, walked away with it, and then Pretti was shot. CBS News verified videos showing that Pretti was holding a phone in his right hand and nothing in his left before he was shot. Minnesota officials confirmed Pretti was a lawful gun owner with a permit to carry. He had no criminal record. Whether he was carrying that day or not, bystander footage doesn't show him brandishing or even holding a weapon before he was shot. The New York Times reported that 2 officers fired at least 10 shots at Pretti over a period of 5 seconds. 10 shots. 5 seconds. A man who was on the ground, surrounded by 6 federal agents. The videos created an immediate political crisis for the Trump administration, and not just from Democrats. Republicans, who had largely given Trump complete loyalty during his first year back in office, started breaking ranks. Senator Jerry Moran, Republican from Kansas, posted, "I am deeply troubled by the shootings in Minneapolis involving federal agents. Our Constitution provides citizens protection from the government. We have a right to free speech, to peaceably assemble, and to bear arms." This is significant. A Republican senator invoking constitutional protections for citizens against government overreach in the context of a Trump administration operation. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, said on his podcast that the administration should be more measured in describing the killing of Pretti, Texas. Governor Greg Abbott, a staunch Trump ally, said the White House should recalibrate its immigration enforcement. House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Andrew Garbarino, a Republican, requested testimony from leaders at ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, saying his top priority was keeping Americans safe. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt told CNN the shooting was a real tragedy, and Trump needs to define an end game. Perhaps most dramatically, Chris Mattel, a Minneapolis attorney who was running as a Republican for Minnesota governor, announced he was ending his campaign because of the National Party's retribution on his state. He called ICE operations in Minnesota an unmitigated disaster. A Republican gubernatorial candidate dropping out of the race because of Trump's immigration enforcement in his state. That's not supposed to happen in 2026. And the backlash wasn't just from politicians. According to an AP NORC poll, approval of Trump's handling of immigration, long considered his political strength, has tumbled. Just 38% of U.S. adults approved of how Trump was handling immigration in January, down from 49% in March. A collapse in approval on his signature issue. All of this created what multiple Trump administration officials and allies described to NBC News as a moment when Trump became concerned about the sustainability of the Minneapolis operations. Translation: the political optics were a disaster, and Trump knew it. Once the videos made the government's initial statements indefensible, the Trump administration went into damage control mode. On Monday, January 26th, just 2 days after Pretti's death, Trump announced a series of major changes to the Minneapolis operation. First, he sent border czar Tom Homan to Minneapolis to take over immigration enforcement operations, effectively sidelining DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and removing Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino from his leadership role. Bovino, who had been the public face of the aggressive enforcement tactics, was stripped of his title as Commander-at-Large and had his access to social media accounts suspended. He was expected to return to the Border Patrol station in El Centro, California, briefly before retiring. This is the Trump administration's way of making someone disappear without officially firing them. Second, the White House announced that the number of federal agents in Minneapolis would be reduced, though they wouldn't specify by how many. More than 3,000 agents had been deployed. Now some would be leaving. Third, in a stunning reversal, Trump personally called Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat who had been Trump's vice presidential opponent and whom Trump had recently accused of inciting insurrection. The call was described by both sides as productive and even good. Trump posted that he and Walz seemed to be on a similar wavelength. Walz's office said Trump agreed to talk to DHS about allowing state officials to conduct their own independent shooting investigations and decreasing the number of federal agents in the state. This is diplomatic language for Trump blinked. Fourth, Trump also called Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, another Democrat who had been a target of Trump's criticism. Trump described it as a very good telephone conversation. Fifth, at a White House briefing, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked if Trump agreed that Pretti was a domestic terrorist, the term both Noam and Stephen Miller had used. Leavitt's response? I have not heard the president characterize Mr. Pretti in that way. However, I have heard the president say he wants to let the facts and the investigation lead itself. That's a direct distancing from his own administration officials' inflammatory statements. The message was clear. Trump was throwing Noam, Bovino, and even Miller under the bus to save himself from the political fallout. I think she was freelancing a bit, one Trump advisor told NBC News about Noam's characterization of Pretti as someone trying to impede law enforcement. Translation: she's being blamed for saying publicly what the administration was saying privately. Here's what makes this even more disturbing. Pretti and good aren't isolated cases. The Washington Post reported that the Trump administration declared 16 DHS shootings since July justified before investigations were even completed. 16 shootings, all declared justified before the facts were fully known. According to The Guardian, statements made by the Trump administration about Pretti in the aftermath of the shooting demonstrated a pattern of blaming the victim without regard for the available evidence. This is systemic. The pattern is shoot first, justify it immediately, blame the victim, and only walk it back when video evidence makes the initial narrative untenable. But by then, the damage is done. The victim is already demonized in right-wing media. The agents are already absolved. And the investigation, conducted by Homeland Security Investigations, which is part of the same Department of Homeland Security that employs the agents who did the shooting, is compromised from the start. Minneapolis Police Chief O'Hara specifically noted that federal agents blocked his officers and members of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension from the scene after the killing. They prevented local law enforcement from investigating. They controlled the crime scene. They collected evidence, including Pretti's cell phone, and then they announced their own version of events before anyone else could verify it. This is not how legitimate law enforcement operates. This is how cover-ups operate. The fact that Republicans, members of Trump's own party, are now demanding independent investigations tells you how badly this has spiraled out of control. Inside the Trump administration, the problem was being framed not as, we killed 2 innocent Americans, but as, the visuals were not playing well. The visuals were not playing well. He understands TV. He saw it for himself, said a Republican lawmaker granted anonymity by NBC News. The president, I think, is obviously concerned about what he saw over the weekend, said one Trump advisor. He has always been exceptionally good at reading public perception and understands this has not been handled well. Notice the language, not this was wrong, not we need accountability, but this has not been handled well, and the visuals were not playing well. This is PR management, not policy correction. A person close to the White House explained the optics problem this way. The problem is, in order to get the felons out, it takes a massive team of federal agents, so you see 10, 12, or 60 people to get a guy. Then the crowd gets incited and the rhetoric heats up and people are blowing whistles and then you see the tear gas. And it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing indeed? The Trump advisor continued, I think the public perception is we need to make sure what we're doing is done well and with excellence and get back to focusing on the worst of the worst. But here's the thing, Alex Pretti wasn't the worst of the worst. He was an ICU nurse. Renee Good wasn't a criminal. She was a U.S. citizen. The operation wasn't targeting the worst of the worst. It had become a blunt instrument of intimidation, occupying a major American city with thousands of federal agents who now have a pattern of using lethal force against U.S. citizens. And the Trump administration's concern isn't about the policy, it's about how it looks. On Monday, ICE's social media team tried to rehabilitate the agency's image by posting about agents helping someone with a dead car battery in a Minneapolis parking lot. After discovering that his vehicle had a dead battery, the officers quickly offered their assistance, read the post. Using jumper cables from their own vehicle and with help from another community member, they successfully jump-started the car, ensuring he could safely continue on his way. This is what damage control looks like when you've killed 2 people in 3 weeks. Post about jumping a car battery. There's a reason Trump is suddenly concerned about Minnesota. It's not just about public perception in general. It's about the 2026 midterm elections. Minnesota is a swing state. Republicans are trying to flip the governorship and gain seats in Congress. The state has been trending purple, and Trump's team saw it as winnable. But you can't win Minnesota when federal agents are killing citizens in Minneapolis, and when a Republican gubernatorial candidate is dropping out of the race specifically because of Trump's policies in the state. Chris Madel's withdrawal statement was brutal. He called ICE operations in Minnesota an unmitigated disaster and cited the National Party's retribution on his state as the reason he could no longer run. That's a Republican candidate publicly repudiating Trump's signature policy in a swing state 8 months before a midterm election. Congressional Republicans are terrified. They've been watching Trump's approval on immigration, his strongest issue, collapse. They've been watching videos of federal agents shooting U.S. citizens go viral. They've been fielding angry calls from constituents, and they know that in November they're going to have to answer for this. Senate Majority Leader John Thune called Homan's deployment to Minnesota a positive development, which is political code for "thank God someone is trying to clean up this mess." The elevation of Homan was described by multiple sources as a lifeline to congressional Republicans who needed to be able to tell voters that Trump was taking the situation seriously. But it's not clear that changing the leadership will change the fundamental problem. When you deploy 3,000 federal agents to occupy a city with instructions to aggressively enforce immigration law, violence is going to happen. The policy itself is the problem. Let's zoom out and talk about what's really happening here. Because this isn't just about immigration enforcement. This is about the relationship between federal power and citizen rights. Senator Jerry Moran's statement was perhaps the most significant from a constitutional perspective. Our Constitution provides citizens protection from the government. We have a right to free speech, to peaceably assemble, and to bear arms. Think about the irony here. Alex Pretti was exercising all 3 of those rights. He was engaged in free speech, recording federal agents and expressing his opposition to their actions. He was peaceably assembling, gathering with other citizens to protest government policy. And he was, according to Minnesota officials, a lawful gun owner with a permit to carry, exercising his Second Amendment rights. And he was killed by federal agents who then called him a domestic terrorist. The Republican Party has spent decades positioning itself as the defender of these exact constitutional rights. The right to bear arms, the right to free speech, the right to protest government overreach. And now, Republicans are watching a Republican administration kill a citizen who was exercising those rights and initially try to justify it. That's why so many Republicans are uncomfortable. This exposes a fundamental tension in their coalition. Are we the party of law and order, even when that means federal agents killing citizens? Or are we the party of constitutional rights and limited government, even when that means criticizing law enforcement? You can't be both when federal agents are shooting people for filming them and helping others. The fact that this tension is now publicly visible, with Republican officials breaking from Trump, suggests the political calculus has changed. For the first time in Trump's second term, being loyal to Trump on immigration enforcement might be more politically dangerous than opposing him. Tom Homan arriving in Minneapolis doesn't solve the fundamental problem. It just changes who's in charge of the same policy. The stated goal is to refocus on fraud investigations rather than street-level immigration enforcement. But the fraud investigation has been ongoing since 2022 and doesn't require 3,000 federal agents occupying a city. What seems more likely is that the Trump administration will quietly reduce the visible federal presence in Minneapolis, conduct fewer large-scale operations, and hope the news cycle moves on. But the legal and political consequences are just beginning. Minnesota's Attorney General has filed suit seeking to end the federal deployment in the state entirely. The U.S. District Court for Minnesota has convened hearings on multiple lawsuits related to the federal surge, including one seeking to prevent federal officials from destroying evidence related to the Pretti shooting. Homeland Security Investigations, part of the same DHS that employs the agents who shot Pretti, is conducting the investigation into the shooting. That's like asking the police department to investigate itself. State officials are demanding an independent investigation. Whether they'll get one remains to be seen. Meanwhile, memorials for Alex Pretti continue to grow at 26th and Nicollet in Minneapolis. Person after person stops by to add flowers, signs, and notes. The spot where federal agents killed an American citizen has become a gathering place, a place to grieve, a place to ask questions, a place to demand accountability, and across the country, Americans are watching and wondering, if this can happen in Minneapolis to a nurse with no criminal record, where else can it happen? Who else is at risk? 2 American citizens are dead, killed by federal agents conducting immigration enforcement operations in an American city. Both were 37 years old. Both had no criminal records. Neither was the target of any investigation. They were collateral damage in an operation that deployed more than 3,000 federal agents to a single city, more than 90% of whom were not even immigration enforcement agents but Border Patrol officers pulled from the southern border. The Trump administration's first instinct was to blame the victims, to call them domestic terrorists and claim they attacked law enforcement. Then the videos came out and the narrative collapsed. Now the administration is scrambling, changing leadership, reducing agent numbers, making nice with Democratic officials they'd been attacking days earlier. But 2 people are still dead. And the fundamental question remains unanswered. In America, can federal agents kill citizens with impunity as long as they claim those citizens were threats? Because that's what happened here. Federal agents killed Alex Pretti, immediately claimed he was a violent threat, and it was only because multiple bystanders happened to be recording that the truth came out. What happens in the next operation where there aren't cameras? What happens when federal agents know they can shape the narrative before anyone challenges it? The crisis in Minneapolis isn't just about immigration policy. It's about accountability. It's about the relationship between citizens and the government that's supposed to serve them. And right now, that relationship is broken. Thanks for watching. If this analysis opened your eyes to what's really happening with immigration enforcement, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and most importantly, demand accountability from your elected officials. Because if we normalize federal agents killing citizens and calling them terrorists, we've lost something fundamental about what it means to be America. The videos don't lie, the victims can't speak, but we can.